High above the valley floor of Yosemite National Park, where granite walls have stood in apparent stillness for thousands of years, a fracture appeared with almost no warning, cutting through a cliff face that had long been considered stable even by the restless standards of mountain geology. A span of rock measuring roughly 200 feet in length, about 61 meters, opened along the western flank of the Royal Arches Formation, and the questions that followed were immediate and difficult to dismiss. How does a feature of that scale form within a matter of days, when the surrounding rock mass has endured countless seasons of heat, cold, and seismic motion? What internal stresses must already have been present for such a rupture to emerge so quickly? And perhaps most pressing, what does the sudden appearance of such a crack indicate about what may still be moving, unseen, within the granite above one of the most visited landscapes in the United States? The sequence of events, as reconstructed from available observations, does not follow the slow, incremental progression that might be expected of visible geological change. A climbing guide who ascended the area in early August of 2023 reported no visible abnormalities. Within roughly 2 weeks, the same route revealed a newly formed fissure extending up to 200 feet, about 61 meters, long and approximately 1 inch or 2.5 centimeters wide at certain points. The change was not gradual in the sense that observers could track its steady growth over months. Instead, it manifested within a narrow window of time, suggesting that the underlying forces had been accumulating long before any visible break appeared. The location of the fracture is not incidental. The Royal Arches Formation rises prominently above Yosemite Valley, composed of granitic rock that originated deep beneath the Earth's surface as molten material that cooled and crystallized over millions of years. What is visible today is not the product of surface deposition, but the exposed interior of a once deeply buried body of rock. Over time, erosion stripped away the overlying material, revealing steep, near-vertical faces intersected by natural joints and fractures. These joints are not random. They represent planes of weakness formed during cooling, unloading, and tectonic stress. Within such a structure, the potential for separation is always present, even when the surface appears intact. The newly observed crack developed along one of these structural weaknesses near a well-known climbing route called Superslide. Its position along the western side of the formation placed it directly above a section of the Yosemite Valley Loop Trail, a route frequented by hikers moving beneath the towering cliffs. The immediate concern was not merely the presence of the crack itself, but what it indicated about the stability of the rock mass surrounding it. Subsequent examination revealed that the fracture had partially detached a large pillar of granite from the main cliff face, effectively isolating a block whose connection to the underlying formation had been significantly reduced. This partial detachment is critical to understanding the level of risk. In massive granite formations, fractures often define the boundaries of blocks that can remain stable for extended periods or fail suddenly when conditions shift. The existence of a continuous crack along a substantial vertical extent suggests that a discrete volume of rock has begun to behave independently from the surrounding structure. Once separation reaches a certain threshold, gravitational forces acting on that block may exceed the remaining strength of its attachments, leading to rockfall. The response from park authorities was immediate and precautionary. A segment of the Yosemite Valley Loop Trail, approximately a quarter mile, about 4/10 of a kilometer, was closed to reduce exposure to potential rockfall from above. Climbing routes in the vicinity, including several well-known lines spanning from Peruvian Flake West to the Rhombus Wall, were also shut down. The closures were not based on a single observed event, but on the recognition that the conditions for a significant rockfall were actively developing. What makes this particular fracture notable is not solely its size, but the manner in which it was observed to behave. Reports from those who examined the crack directly described audible sounds emanating from within the rock, likened to the cracking of a frozen surface that has not fully consolidated. Small fragments of granite were seen moving within the fissure, falling without contacting the outer surfaces, indicating that internal movement was ongoing even after the crack had become visible. Such activity points to a dynamic process rather than a static break, suggesting that the fracture was still propagating or adjusting under stress. Rockfalls are not uncommon within Yosemite. The steep granite walls that define the valley are subject to a range of processes that can trigger detachment, including precipitation, seismic activity, and freeze-thaw cycles. Data from recent years indicate dozens of rockfalls occurring annually within the park, with some events involving thousands of tons of material. However, the emergence of a large, clearly defined crack over such a short time scale distinguishes this case from many routine rockfall events, which often occur without prior visible warning. The mechanics behind such a fracture involve a combination of long-term and short-term factors. Over extended periods, the granite of Yosemite experiences stress from the gradual removal of overlying rock, a process known as unloading. As the confining pressure decreases, the rock expands slightly, leading to the formation of sheet joints parallel to the surface. These joints can create conditions where slabs or pillars become separated from the main body of the cliff. Superimposed on this are daily and seasonal temperature variations. Granite expands when heated and contracts when cooled, and repeated cycles of thermal expansion and contraction can incrementally widen existing fractures. Research conducted on similar formations within the Royal Arches has demonstrated that temperature fluctuations alone can cause measurable movement within cracks, with openings increasing during warmer periods. While such changes are typically small, they can contribute to the gradual weakening of the rock over time. When combined with other factors such as moisture infiltration or seismic vibrations, the cumulative effect may reach a point where the rock can no longer sustain the stress distribution it has been carrying. The timing of the crack's appearance, occurring within a span of days, suggests that a threshold condition was reached. Prior to that moment, the stresses within the rock mass were likely distributed in a way that maintained equilibrium, even if only marginally. Once the balance shifted, whether due to thermal conditions, minor seismic activity, or internal stress redistribution, the system responded by forming a visible fracture. In this sense, the crack did not begin at the moment it was first seen. Rather, it represents the surface expression of processes that had been developing unseen. The identification of the crack by climbers underscores the role of human presence in detecting such changes. Many sections of Yosemite's cliffs are rarely observed up close, and subtle shifts can go unnoticed until they reach a scale that is visible from a distance or encountered directly. In this case, the rapid emergence of a feature large enough to span 200 feet meant that it could not remain hidden once it formed. The naming of the crack, informally referred to as supernatural within climbing circles, reflects both its proximity to established routes and the unusual nature of its appearance. Yet the designation does not alter the underlying reality that the formation represents a significant structural change within the cliff. Subsequent reports have indicated that the fissure continued to widen over time, reaching several inches, roughly 10 centimeters, in width, further increasing concerns about stability. The widening of a crack is not merely a matter of dimensional change, it is indicative of ongoing deformation within the rock. As the gap increases, the contact area between the detached block and the main cliff decreases, reducing frictional resistance and making movement more likely. The process can be episodic, with periods of relative stability punctuated by incremental shifts that enlarge the fracture. Each of these shifts may be too small to detect individually, yet collectively they contribute to the progression toward potential failure. Below the fracture, the landscape remains shaped by the same forces that created the cliffs themselves. Yosemite Valley is carved into a granitic batholith, its walls rising steeply above the valley floor. The visual impression of permanence conveyed by these formations contrasts with the underlying reality that they are continually evolving. Rockfalls, fractures, and subtle deformations are part of an ongoing process that reshapes the valley over time, even if the changes are not immediately apparent to those passing through. The closure of trails and climbing routes serves as a reminder that the apparent stability of such environments can change quickly. The presence of a large, actively evolving crack introduces uncertainty not only about the immediate area, but also about adjacent sections of the cliff that may be influenced by the same stress conditions. While the visible fissure marks one zone of weakness, it does not necessarily define the full extent of the instability within the rock mass. As attention remains focused on the Royal Arches, the broader implications of the event extend beyond a single fracture. The conditions that allowed this crack to form, accumulated stress, structural weaknesses, and environmental influences, are not unique to one location. Similar processes are at work throughout the granite walls of Yosemite, shaping the landscape in ways that are often only recognized after a visible change occurs. The emergence of a 200-foot, 61-meter crack within such a short time frame underscores the dynamic nature of even the most seemingly solid geological features. It raises questions not only about what has already shifted within the rock, but about what continues to adjust beneath the surface, where fractures can develop long before they become visible. The cliff face above the closed trail remains in a state of transition, its current form representing only a moment within a much longer sequence of change. Yosemite National Park is not simply a collection of rock walls, it is an exposed segment of a vast intrusive complex known as the Sierra Nevada batholith, a body of igneous rock that formed beneath the surface over tens of millions of years. The granite seen today was once located several miles underground, subjected to intense pressure and temperature before gradual uplift and erosion revealed it. The origin of this batholith traces back to a period when the western edge of the North American continent was an active convergent margin. An oceanic plate, part of the ancient Farallon plate, was being forced beneath the continental crust. As it descended, it released water into the overlying mantle, lowering the melting point of surrounding rock and generating magma. This magma rose slowly through the crust, pooling in large chambers where it cooled over extended periods. Unlike volcanic eruptions that solidify quickly at the surface, this subsurface cooling allowed large crystals of quartz, feldspar, and mica to form, giving Yosemite granite its coarse-grained texture. These intrusive bodies did not form all at once. Instead, they accumulated in pulses over tens of millions of years, with each injection of magma adding to the growing mass. The resulting batholith is not uniform. It is composed of multiple plutons with slightly different compositions, densities, and cooling histories. This internal variability plays a significant role in how the rock behaves under stress. Boundaries between plutons can act as zones of weakness, while variations in mineral composition influence how the rock responds to temperature changes and mechanical forces. Once the subduction processes waned and the Farallon plate was largely consumed, the tectonic regime shifted. The region transitioned from compression to a combination of uplift and extension, leading to the gradual rise of the Sierra Nevada. Over millions of years, erosion removed the overlying layers of rock, exposing the once buried granite. This process, known as exhumation, fundamentally altered the stress environment within the rock mass. When granite forms deep underground, it is compressed from all directions. As overlying material is stripped away, that confining pressure is reduced, and the rock expands slightly in response. This expansion does not occur uniformly. Instead, it produces a network of fractures known as joints. Among the most distinctive of these are sheet joints, which develop roughly parallel to the surface of the rock. In Yosemite, these joints are particularly prominent and can be seen as curved, exfoliating layers that peel away from the main body of the cliff. The royal arches themselves are shaped by this process, their sweeping forms reflecting the geometry of sheet jointing. Sheet joints are critical to understanding why large cracks can form suddenly. They define planes along which the rock is already predisposed to separate. Over time, these joints can widen due to a combination of mechanical and environmental factors. Water can infiltrate the fractures, exerting pressure when it freezes or chemically altering the minerals along the joint surfaces. Even in the absence of freezing, the presence of moisture can reduce friction and facilitate movement. The result is a progressive weakening of the rock along pre-existing planes. Superimposed on this structural framework are the effects of daily and seasonal temperature variations. Granite, like most materials, expands when heated and contracts when cooled. In a massive rock face exposed to direct sunlight, temperature differences between the outer surface and the interior can be substantial. During the day, the surface heats and expands, while at night it cools and contracts. These cycles generate stress within the rock, particularly along existing fractures where differential movement can occur. Over thousands of cycles, even small expansions and contractions can have cumulative effects. Microcracks may form and link together, gradually increasing the size of fractures. In some cases, the process remains stable for long periods, with the rock adjusting incrementally without visible change. In others, the accumulation of strain reaches a tipping point where a larger fracture propagates rapidly, as appears to have occurred at the Royal Arches. Another contributing factor is the role of gravity acting on steep, near-vertical cliffs. The granite walls of Yosemite Valley rise hundreds to thousands of feet, hundreds of meters, above the valley floor. The weight of the rock itself creates a constant downward force, and where joints isolate blocks or columns, that force can become concentrated along relatively small contact areas. As fractures develop and widen, the effective support for these blocks decreases. At a certain threshold, the balance between gravitational force and frictional resistance can shift abruptly. Seismic activity, although not always immediately apparent, also plays a role in the long-term evolution of Yosemite's cliffs. The Sierra Nevada is not as seismically active as some other regions of California, yet it is not entirely free from earthquakes. Even minor seismic events can transmit energy through the rock, potentially influencing the stability of already weakened areas. Vibrations may not directly cause large fractures, but they can contribute to the gradual redistribution of stress within the rock mass. The geometry of Yosemite Valley itself is the product of both tectonic and glacial processes. While the granite was formed deep underground, the valley's current shape was carved largely by glaciers during the Pleistocene epoch. Massive valley glaciers moved through the region, eroding and widening existing river valleys. This glacial action steepened the valley walls, removing material that might otherwise have buttressed the base of the cliffs. The result is a landscape characterized by sheer granite faces that are inherently more susceptible to rockfall. Glacial erosion also influenced the pattern of joints within the rock. As glaciers carved away material, they exposed new surfaces and altered the stress distribution within the valley walls. The removal of support from the base of the cliffs allowed stress to concentrate higher up, potentially contributing to the development of fractures like the one observed at the Royal Arches. In this sense, the current instability is linked not only to modern environmental conditions, but also to processes that occurred thousands to millions of years ago. Within the granite itself, mineral composition plays a subtle but important role. Quartz, feldspar, and mica each respond differently to temperature and pressure changes. Feldspar, which makes up a significant portion of Yosemite granite, can undergo chemical weathering that weakens the rock over time. Mica, with its layered structure, can provide planes of weakness along which the rock may split. These mineralogical characteristics do not cause fractures on their own, but they influence how and where cracks develop and propagate. The crack at the Royal Arches can therefore be seen as the result of multiple overlapping processes operating across vastly different timescales. The initial formation of the granite occurred tens of millions of years ago. The development of joints and the exhumation of the batholith unfolded over millions of years. Glacial carving reshaped the valley over tens of thousands of years. Thermal cycling, moisture infiltration, and minor seismic activity have been acting over years to centuries. The visible fracture that emerged within days is the surface expression of this long chain of events. One of the more revealing aspects of such events is how they highlight the non-uniform nature of stress within the rock. Even within a seemingly homogeneous granite face, stress is distributed unevenly due to variations in structure, joint orientation, and external forces. Certain areas may remain stable for extended periods, while adjacent sections are gradually approaching failure. The sudden appearance of a crack suggests that a localized area reached a critical condition, allowing the fracture to propagate rapidly along pre-existing planes of weakness. The continued evolution of such a fracture depends on how these stresses are redistributed after the initial break. When a crack forms, it changes the internal stress field of the surrounding rock. Some areas may experience reduced stress, while others may see an increase. This redistribution can either stabilize the situation temporarily or lead to further cracking and eventual detachment. Observations of widening gaps and internal movement within the Royal Arches fracture indicate that the system is still adjusting. Yosemite's geological framework ensures that such adjustments are ongoing. The Sierra Nevada continues to experience uplift, albeit at a slow rate, and erosion continues to remove material from the landscape. These processes maintain a state of dynamic equilibrium, where the form of the landscape is constantly being modified even if the changes are not immediately visible. Rockfalls, whether small or large, are an integral part of this process, serving as one of the primary mechanisms by which the cliffs evolve. The scale of the granite formations can obscure this dynamism. Walls that appear immovable on human timescales are, in geological terms, transient features shaped by a balance of forces that can shift with relatively minor changes in conditions. A crack extending 200 feet, about 61 meters, serves as a visible reminder of that balance, marking a point where the internal stresses of the rock have overcome its capacity to remain intact. In examining the geology of Yosemite through the lens of such an event, the distinction between sudden and gradual change becomes less clear. The fracture may have appeared quickly, but its causes are deeply rooted in processes that have been unfolding for millions of years. The granite cliffs, while enduring, are not static. They are the current state of a system that continues to evolve, shaped by the interplay of tectonics, erosion, temperature, and gravity.